I'm David Knox. I'm part of the British Council MENA regional team, and I'm going to try and steer us through a panel discussion with an unenviable task of looking at the reform agendas. The panel represents people with backgrounds in those specific areas. I think I've asked speakers to describe. I can start on my far right with Professor Karim Tahboub, who is a professor at the Palestine Polytechnic University, former advisor to the Minister of Higher Education. He still sits on the Scientific Research Council committee. Background in mechanical engineering, robotics, and neurology. So I think it's fair to say somebody who is able to advise on research and innovation and that end of the skills matrix. To my immediate right, we have Dr. Samia Abu Hamad, who's the head of the English department in the Center for Education Research and Development in Lebanon, under the Ministry of Education. And her brief includes the setting of the national schools curriculum for English. She also has advisor to the Minister of Vocational Education and Employment in Tunisia, a background as an engineer and in the chemicals industry, establishing training facilities within the industry. He went on to lead a project for the reform of the vocational sector, vocational training sector in Tunisia. Moving to the left again is Bill Malcolm, who's the Group Director for International Quality Assurance and Assessment Services for City and Guilds. Over 30 years of experience in education in the UK and internationally, working with a range of providers from the public and private sector. I think City and Guilds is a examinations assessment that's well known within the region, with ambitions to expand and develop new services. And on my far left, my colleague and counterpart, Gail Campbell, who leads our education work in the British Council across MENA. Her background is as a skills advisor within the organisation. Prior to that, also with City and Guilds. And she's going to set out just some thoughts and challenges around 5 pillars of successful TVET systems. So if I might start with Dr. Samia Abu Hamad, just to give some opening remarks, starting with the school system. Well, I'm not asking a question specifically to start. I think if you'd like to offer the observations that you've found in terms of challenges and opportunities for reform and development, but perhaps looking at it from the school sector.
At mainstream pre-university level, actually we are looking for how can we prepare secondary students in Lebanese classrooms for the world of work. And actually we conducted a small survey in which we had partners which were teachers, students, curricula designers and authors, as well as feedback from human resources at banks and Lebanese companies based on the shortages perceived in the pre-university applicants. And we adopted the 21st century 10 skills shortages for a period of 2 months from January 2014 to January 2015. And out of these 10 shortages that we took from the UK model among universities, 6 were selected that are directly related to pre-university curricular objectives. And the shortages were communication skills as number 1, leadership, ability to work in a team, problem solving, foreign language, and numeracy. And I'm not going to talk about them all because due to time constraints. Actually, when these were analyzed, although the Lebanese system adopts the cooperative group learning in our curricula, as well as the instruction of 3 languages, Arabic, English, and French, our students still had problems in communication skills. And they were mainly in the productive skills and such as individual presentation skills like presentations as such, or participating orally in dialogues. And although spoken interaction is taught at an early age, its components are taught separated, and this does not equip our students for the world of work. So for listening and speaking, for further curricula design, these were our suggestions for the individual spoken production. Ours highlights on genres like descriptive, informative, and narrative, while it could involve presenting to a targeted audience, clarity, logical sequencing of ideas, structure, use of visuals, and body language such as eye contacts and gestures. Now, communicating with others such as in dialogues, our schools focus on social interaction, small talk, humor, friendly conversations, affection, and support. As to problem solving and in-depth discussions, these have to be focused on, as well as listening with interest and empathy, telephoning skills, clarifying and summarizing, persuading and negotiating, which means agreements and dealing with disagreements, accepting and giving constructive criticism, and motivating and supporting others. Now, the written communications, we took samples, fill-ins that we requested from banks and companies for the from HR departments, pre-university applicants. So almost every single CV or piece of writing had basic mistakes in spelling and grammar. And some of these include mistakes in writing, for example, baccalaureate certificate or socioeconomy instead of socioeconomics for their majors, and to the extent of having mistakes in writing employers' names, such as mistakes in writing Mediterranean bag. They also struggle with content. Students struggle with content when answering written questions related to employability skills or when asked to write short essays. However, they could manage with style and structures. Now, the HR related the following points as that they prioritized in selecting applicants at pre-university level. Number 1 for them is communication skills, 2, presentation skills, 3, teamwork, motivation, and attitude for work, and 4, leadership skills, critical thinking, logic, commercial awareness, and numeracy.
Thank you. So that's a really helpful sort of scene setting of how in Lebanon we've seen the central body taking soundings as to what the gaps are and how to beginning to think about how to close those gaps. Perhaps we can invite our colleague Hedi Triki from Tunisia to give us an overview of and some opening remarks on the systems reform in Tunisia.
شكرا. أنا في نظري أن معالجة ملف التشغيل وارتفاع نسبة البطالة يبدأ أولا بتحديد الأسباب ومعالجتها. ومن أسباب ارتفاع نسبة البطالة هي سوء التصرف في مواردنا البشرية. ومن أهم مكونات الموارد البشرية عندنا هي التدريب المهني. وفي رأيي يجب يكون عنده بعد استراتيجي. والإصلاح الهيكلي يكون يعتمد على مقاربة شاملة. أولا، والعنصر الأساسي أنا أعتبره هو الجانب الثقافي، لأن عندنا في الدول العربية نظرة إلى التدريب المهني نظرة دونية، ونعتبر أن التدريب المهني هو حاوية للفاشلين في الدراسة، وهو عنصر مهم جدا. إذن علينا أن نتجه صوب المجتمع لنغير فيه هذه النظرة، ويجب أن يعتبر أن التدريب المهني هو قطاع استراتيجي للنهوض بالاقتصاد وبمنظومة الموارد البشرية. وفي هذا الإطار احنا قمنا بإعداد مشروع إصلاح لهذه المنظومة، وفي يجب أن نضع هذه المنظومة في إطار تكامل وتفاعل مع بقية منظومات الموارد البشرية، أعني بها التعليم العالي والتربية والتعليم الأساسي والشباب والطفولة. لأن في الحقيقة التدريب المهني أو اكتساب المهارات لا يبدأ يعني من خريجي التعليم الأساسي، بل يبدأ من الطفولة. يعني نعلم أبنائنا وأطفالنا وهم صغار. شوفوا احنا بعض الدول المتقدمة في الجانب التكنولوجي والصناعي، شوفوا يعلموا أطفالهم بالصغر وهم يلعبون. إذن هذا الجانب أنا أرى أن وضع خطط لإصلاح هذه المنظومة يجب أن تكون ذا بعد استراتيجي واستشرافي للمستقبل، وتحديد بالأساس حاجيات سوق الشغل في الدول العربية من الكفاءات والمهارات المهنية. أنا أعطيكم مثال. في تونس عندنا إشكال، رغم نسبة البطالة اللي كانت مرتفعة في بداية الثورة تقريبا 18.7%، ما يعد تقريبا 700,000 عاطل عن العمل على 10 ملايين سكن. الآن أصبحت 15.3%، يعني تقريبا 600,000. نسبة العاطل عن العمل من الشهادة العليا 240,000. لكن من المفارقات وفي المقابل عندنا نقص في اليد العاملة في المجال الصناعي فقط 120,000. وأن بعض الصناعيين اليوم مهددون بالإفلاس لنقص في اليد العاملة، بل يطالبوننا بجلب يد العاملة من أفريقيا. هذا انخرام في الهرم المهني في تونس، يعني أن نسبة التعطيل في المؤسسات ضعيف، ثم هناك فقدان أساسي للمهارات الوسيطة. إذا كنا فعلا نريد إصلاح يجب أن نقوم بهذه المعادلة، يعني وهذا لا يمكن إلا بإصلاح هيكلي لمنظومة الموارد البشرية، وبالأساس منها واللي تعتبر مصدر المهارات الوسيطة هو التدريب المهني. إذن على هذا الأساس احنا انطلقنا في إصلاح منظومة التدريب المهني تقريبا عندنا 3 سنوات، وكانت المقاربة هي مقاربة بالأساس تشاركية، يعني شاركنا كل الأطراف اللي معنية بالتشغيل، يعني بها النقابات العمالية، النقابات المهنية، المجتمع المدني. تعرف المجتمع المدني في تونس قوي مؤطر، العاطلين عن العمل اللي هم موجودين في جمعيات، الأسر. إذن قضية البطالة سنجعل منها إن شاء الله هي مش قضية الدولة وحدها، وعلى الطالب الشغل يكون واعي بهذا، أن مشكلة البطالة مش مشكلة الدولة وحدها. يعني لا يكفي أن الشاب أو حصوله على الإجازة وتخرج من التعليم العالي يحمل الدولة وحدها هي مسؤولية التشغيل، بل هو في شخص مسؤول على هذا. ولكن حتى نجعل منه شخص مسؤول ويبادر، لازم نبدأ منذ الصغر، منذ الطفولة، لأن يعني هناك مكاسب، هناك مهارات حياتية يكسبها الطفل منذ الصغر إلى أن يتخرج، يكون عنده مش فقط مجال وحيد للشغل، يعني مش فقط الإجازة أو الدبلوم التعليم العالي تحصل عليه هو الوسيلة الوحيدة لتشغيله. فيجب أن يكون في مجالات أخرى نوفرها له، أو إن كان بالتأهيل، إعادة تأهيل. إذا كان إحنا عندنا ما يسمى بأصحاب الشهائد صعبي الإدماج، مثلا متكون في الفلسفة، تخرج إجازة في الفلسفة أو في اللغات، والتشغيل والوظائف الحكومية كان في التعليم أو في الصناعة لا تستوعب هذا العدد. فيجب إعادة تأهيل وإيجاد برامج وسبل أخرى
Thank you very much. I think that presentation builds on many of the other conversations that have happened in the various meeting rooms. The immediately preceding experiences of ILO, the cultural changes that are required amongst parents, amongst young people, the idea that the state doesn't solve employment or unemployment challenges, but taking a systems and a whole systems approach to reform, starting with labour market needs. Perhaps I can invite our Professor Karim to give a perspective from Palestine and from the higher education end of the spectrum of the skills reform agenda.
Thank you, David. Please allow me to make some points before coming back to the challenges and opportunities. I believe that life skills and soft skills are very important. They increase the employability. Does it work? Okay, but I am afraid that overemphasizing them at the expense of core competencies is dangerous. Like if we look at schools, I believe that doing anything while not making sure that the pupils can read, write, and calculate will not make sense. So one should be careful not to overemphasize, and I think it is a trend nowadays to overemphasize the importance of these skills. When we talk about engineering education, which is my specialty, core competencies extend to reach things like analysis and understanding of existing and familiar systems, design of systems, dealing with complexity, which is very important nowadays. I mean, classical education concentrate on simple examples when we have an electrical circuit, 3 or 4 components, but we know that in reality, very large integrated systems are existing, and the students need to deal with these when they graduate. When we talk about complexity, we mean the number of components or the relation between these things. I think the university should provide the students with an environment to bridge the gaps between recalling and understanding. Many people are doing this now. And then understanding and ability. If I understand something, it doesn't mean that I'm able to do something. And to bridge the gap between ability and doing. Many students are able, but they are not willing to do, or they don't have the chance to do. So we are looking for an environment for where we can do learning by doing. When we talk about curriculum reform, I think, and from discussions from yesterday, we need to look at it in a holistic approach, in a holistic framework. We need to coordinate between education, basic education, and higher education, between education of different subjects. For example, in Palestine, there was a curriculum reform 15 years ago, but different groups wrote textbooks for different subjects, and these groups were not interacting. And now we discovered that there are contradictions between them, there are gaps, and so on. So there should be an integration. Then there should be an integration between higher education sector or education sector, the private sector, and the public sector. We need to hear from the private sector. Then there should be an integration when we talk about curriculum reform. Then we need to have a system for curriculum assessment and teacher education. When we talk about teacher education, we need to look as well at teacher selection, which is very important, teacher professional development, and teacher assessment. So we cannot just look at one aspect by itself. And I think there is a challenge. The main challenge is how to establish such a system where we have synergy and integration between the different components. And I think the government should be the key player in this domain. It should integrate the different components. The other challenge is the enabling resources, talking about funding. I believe without funding, you cannot do much. As an example, if we look at the cost of educating a student in the Arab world per year, it is $700, whereas in the developing countries, it goes to $10,000. Just looking at these numbers, you can expect what kind of quality we can do while educating these students. If you look at the instructor-student ratio in the Arab world, it is 1 to 31 in average, in comparison to the thought 1 to 15 ratio. The opportunities that I see is the existing of quality assurance agencies in the Arab countries. So these agencies, which are responsible for accreditation, should be able, and actually I invite them to, do benchmarking for skills. You know, we talk usually about intended learning outcomes, but we miss the skill side of these intended learning outcomes. And these agencies as well can help in incorporating the private sector in saying what kind of skills are required for different jobs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Again, I think that's reflected much of the conversation of the last day and a half, and identified those challenges around integration and resourcing. I'm sure there will be people in the audience with a view on the role of government and the role of other actors in providing resources and solutions. So I won't steal that space. Perhaps I can turn to Gail now and invite her to give an overview based on UK and international experience from within the British Council.
Thank you, David. I wanted to focus really on two things. The first point to make is that following the financial crisis in 2008, everybody around the world, with very few exceptions, suffered. And one of the outcomes of that financial crisis in the UK was that we had unemployment, and young people were particularly affected. So many people talk about MENA in terms of the huge numbers of young people who are not engaged in economic development at the moment. They're not engaged in jobs, but this is a global problem. And one of the things that the UK started doing in 2010, 2011 was really to start looking at some strategies that particularly focused on that. And some of those strategies are still underway. We're starting to see some good outcomes. I don't know if you follow the news, but you know, we've got a 2.1 GDP growth in the UK at the moment, which is fantastic news, and it's moving in the right direction. But in terms of you know, what did the UK do in skills education to ensure that you know, we started preparing for a future, which is where we are at the moment in MENA. And they had three clear points, and all strategies emanated from this. They focused on youth employability, you know, and that could have been apprenticeships, looking at curriculum, anything to do with youth employability. There's several bullet points that fall under that. Ensuring that employers are at the heart of skills development. I think that this is something that everybody wants to achieve. UK are at the cusp of achieving, and if you were here yesterday, you would have heard Simon Perryman talk about how that change has happened or is happening in the UK. And most important of all is raising the quality of provision. You know, so making sure that the provision of training is of quality. So that ensures that there's more parity of esteem between academia and skills, which is also something that everybody struggles with. But people coming out of technical education are actually valued by employers and can walk into jobs. Following on that, I think that there are 5 pillars for a successful vocational education system, and this is not something that I've come up with, but it's generally agreed that if you have these 5 pillars, you're on the way of achieving a successful vocational education system, obviously within the context of particular countries or regions. But basically, these are our qualifications framework. Many people think that a qualifications framework is the be-all and end-all. It isn't. It's a tool, but it's a very effective tool. And how governments can use national qualifications frameworks is to make sure that the qualifications within those frameworks are valued and they have value and are offering the skills that are needed for their particular economic position. But most importantly of all, and again talking about parity of esteem, is looking at those qualifications and progression routes. So many people that enter a vocational qualification kind of route, profession, sometimes feel that they are stuck in that profession. And that is a big problem. So for example, in many qualifications frameworks, including the UK one can start at a level 2, working as a plumber, and eventually end up with a master's degree in engineering if they so wanted. And there's several routes, entry and exit points for that. I think the other pillar of that needs to be in place in terms to have what is termed a successful vocational system is qualifications that are unitized. Why? Because qualifications that are unitized means that people can take them at their own pace. It means that marginalized communities or people with families can access education at times that are relevant to them and can accumulate to a qualification which is valued. So looking at qualifications which are achievable in small chunks is an important element of that. The next one is making sure that qualifications in particularly in technical skills actually reflect the needs of employers. So it's about engaging those employers and having their input in the development of qualifications, and making sure that those qualifications are actually linked to opportunities in the economy. You have to have effective labour market information to know where those jobs will be now, in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, and start preparing the workforce for tomorrow. Quality assurance of organisations that offer learning and training opportunities that are internally and externally quality assured. So looking at institutions as self-developing institutions, giving them the autonomy to say this is the standard that you have to reach. You have to reach it. You can do the changes, but as well, we're going to formally audit you externally, and making sure that they're autonomous and non-centralized, so they are flexible enough to be able to change curriculum and training and opportunities according to the economic context around them. And one of the most important tools, I think, for any government is funding. So looking at funding mechanisms that don't just provide standard funding for institutions to keep on delivering what they need to deliver or what they think is their job to deliver, but linking funding to outcomes, making sure that those outcomes are linked to a national strategy that looks at employment and employability at its core. And I think I'll stop there.
Thanks very much. And I'm hoping that perhaps Bill's presentation will describe how, to a degree, his organisation is putting some of that into practice and where they fit, and how that reform process and experiences of City and Guilds in that space.
Thank you, David, and good afternoon, colleagues. We've heard a lot of words of wisdom from the platform, and I've also heard most of what I was going to say already said. So this is almost doing David's job, which is summarising the discussion, but I will continue. I think this, for us who are involved, and this is everybody in this room, in the skills sector, this is an exciting time. But not only is it exciting, it's critical. we have to get it right for the future generations and the future economies of our countries. We need to ensure that we have properly equipped labour force to ensure that all of our people have a full stake in our society. And we have lots of reform agendas going on around this region and elsewhere. And I think that what we are seeing within that are the elements of future success. But what we need to do is ensure that that success occurs. And I think there are various ways, various pointers, various things that we need to look at to ensure that that happens. Qualifications, yes, play a key role in that. Qualifications are an outward recognition that somebody has gone through a period of training, a period of learning, and that they've achieved a degree of success in that process. Qualifications are also important as part of the quality assurance process, so that when somebody has a certificate, a City and Guild certificate or whatever, and present it to a future employer, the employer needs to be sure that if it says on this certificate, this person has a qualification in plumbing at a certain level, they need to be able to trust that. So qualifications are important within the reform process. And I think they are important symbols for both learners and for employers. But I think there are also, I believe there are also other things that we need to get right as we're going through this reform process. And we need to be looking at the various stakeholders that are in the vocational education sector, and governments play a key role. Governments play a key role in setting the policies, setting the frameworks, to ensure that we have a consistent approach, a quality approach to skills development. But that's only one part of the story. We also need to have a fully engaged corporate and organisational sector supporting this programme. We need to know what their future skills needs are. And this isn't just about, as important as the sector is, it's not just about ensuring that our youth have work. It's also about ensuring that those of our people that are in work are trained and retrained for the economies of the future. Because one thing we know is that the skills we have today will not necessarily be the skills that will keep us in work in 5 years, 10 years' time. So skills reform is about continuous development, not just about getting people into that first job. As Gail has said, it's also about having a structure that allows people to dip into training, to dip into upskilling programs. But those programs are also important when we think about the long-term unemployed, people who are often have been through the education system and not necessarily had the best of experiences. So maybe we're looking here at a system that supports training and development in the skills arena that's suitable for people who have a not very successful education history. Short courses, practical courses, with recognition at the end. And that recognition's important because for this group, it's often their first educational success. So we need to ensure that we have that built into the system. And a number of areas we could be looking at, but I think finally I will mention parents in all of this, because we've heard from a number of my colleagues on the platform here, the parity of esteem question around vocational education and training. The parents are key in that. So we need to also make sure that parents are fully aware and start to understand the importance of the vocational education stream compared with the approach to ensuring that their children have a degree, rather than perhaps saying that my child needs a job and to be in a job for life. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And Bill has excellently done like to invite questions, observations from the floor.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I just wanted to share one small thing. One of the members of the panel talked about resources, and amongst those resources, of course, are your teachers. I wanted to share with you an experience that we have at Bahrain Polytechnic, and that is about half, 50% of our tutors, and we call them tutors and we don't call them teachers, 50% of our tutors come from the industry. They are actually industry people, and we employ them full time. And they come from different parts of the world as well. The other 50% are academics that have either worked or been trained in other academic institutions. We have a requirement for everybody who joins the Polytechnic as a member of the teaching team. And that is everybody, regardless of how many years you've been a teacher, anywhere else, everybody has to undergo training. Because we have a certain philosophy and we have a certain strategy, which is PBL based, to sum it up. People of the industry are very good at problem solving. They don't have the classroom skills. People who come from academic institutions are good at standing in front of the classroom, delivering a lecture with a couple of slides, and do not have the methodology and the strategies that we actually advocate. So everyone, regardless of how long you've been working, is actually trained before they have to undergo teacher training before they start working as tutors at the Polytechnic. But I think the most remarkable thing is, and I haven't seen many places that do this, is the high percentage of people from industry who come and teach our students. Thank you.
First, thank you for this panel. 5 pillars, and they remember. I remember something about them. But the question is about employability. When we talk employability with concerning the higher education, we can accept it. It's normally to talk about employability, to implement actions concerning employability in the higher education. What I want to know, if there are any experiences, or how can you advise pre-university educators, or at least curricula developers for pre-university, to implement employability into curricula?
Okay. These could be in the form of extracurricular employability projects for teenagers leading to certification. It could be incorporating employability skills in national curricula to cover language skills, numeracy, among other skills that are required for employability. It could be providing career advisory consultants at pre-university levels, linking employability curricula at pre-university level with higher education curricula for employability, and activating the role of NGOs and alumni networks in introducing employability skills to teenagers or secondary students, developing links with employers, and probably providing them with best practices from professionals, and volunteering could play a part, and it could be within the education reform agenda, and so the pre-university student himself or herself are responsible for actually working on their employability skills. And it could be preparing employability courses similar to CLIL, similar to where you merge content and language together, and upon completion students may sit for a test or so, and then these could be more or less within the official institutionalized curricular reform.
Does anyone else want to respond on that point?
فقط إضافة على ما ذكرته السيدة، ممكن فتح المعابر بين منظومة الموارد البشرية، يعني المسالك والمعابر نقصد يعني الانتقال من التعليم الأساسي إلى التدريب المهني ثم إلى التعليم العالي. وهذه التجربة قد نجحت في تونس في نسبة معينة، أن ممكن أن الشاب هذا أولا فتح الآفاق يعني بالنسبة للتدريب المهني والتعليم الأساسي، ثم أن الإعداد للحياة المهنية أنا في رأيي لا تبدأ من التعليم العالي أو في نهاية التعليم العالي. الإعداد للحياة المهنية تبدأ من التعليم الابتدائي وليس حتى من الأساسي. إذن فتح المعابر وفتح المسالك هي يعني إجراءات أراها ضرورية لإعداد الشاب للحياة المهنية.
So following what the professor, the dean of Polytechnic at Bahrain University, I think that if we want to solve the issue of employability, we should not limit ourselves to the regular dialogue between universities and the socio-economic partners for coordination in terms of trainings, etc. But we should also involve them in setting up modules and the design of the curriculum and the content. For example, we do that in our university and most Moroccan universities for professional BAs and also for master's programs, whereby trainers or part-time trainers from the industry, for example, if we have a professional BA in tourism and communication, we have people from the tourism industry who come as visiting professors, and they were involved at the very beginning in the setting up of modules, so they know that they will be teaching some of the units in the modules. So I think there must be this synergy and coordination between the universities or higher education institutions and the socio-economic environment, not only after the graduation of the students, but within the process of educating them. Thank you.
I agree with that entirely. It is very important that you involve the employers and people from the industry in actually drafting and drawing up your curriculum. But we go even further, one step further than that. After actually finding out what is required by the industry and the workplace, we put together a proposal. I'm simplifying this very much. We put together a proposal, and it is put together by people from the industry who come, as you said, as visiting experts or from overseas or in the country, and then it goes through an internal validation. The whole project, they design the new program from A to Z, and there is an internal validation panel that looks at it and tears it apart wherever it needs to be torn apart. The idea is to enhance. It's a critical friend. So it's done in a collegial and a constructive way. Once that receives approval, what we do is we bring in a panel from overseas, an external validation panel consisting of experts in the field. Let me give you an example, like HR management. This is something we're working on at the moment. It's just passed its internal validation panel evaluation, and we're waiting for the external panel to come. So they come from overseas. So we don't just look at it from within the context of the country and Bahrain and the region, but also within a global context. So they come and give us their feedback before we actually offer a major or a specialization at the Polytechnic. Thank you.
Excuse me. Just an observation around the employability focus within training programs. I think this is particularly important at all levels, and particularly important in vocational sector colleges. And it starts with employer involvement in the design of those programs through the setting of occupational standards and so on, and from that, the development of the qualifications and the curriculum. But critical to that is how it's assessed, because I'm sure we're all familiar with that expression that assessment drives the learning and what actually happens in the training room. And the pedagogy around the delivery of the curriculum and the assessment of the outcomes from that training are critical, and that's why certainly from our perspective and from the perspective of others involved in the qualification side, having assessments that reflect the real workplace experience. So the training environment requires the use of, in engineering, in motor vehicle, the equipment they will be using in the workplace. And then framing that around with an expectation that people will behave in the way they would behave in the workplace. Everything through from timekeeping to the type of shoes they would wear in a workshop, through the use of equipment. All of this drives an employability culture in a way that doesn't seem alien, because it's an integral part to what the student, the learner, has signed up to do.
I'm not sure how I'm being assessed or this panel's being assessed, but someone's just mentioned timekeeping. I know we started a bit late. If we can take one more round of questions, if people's stomachs aren't too bursting. Gentleman over here has been very patiently waiting.
شكرا. وأنا أستمع إلى بعض التدخلات. أعتقد أن كيفية تشجيع الشباب في المدارس بالأخص ما قبل الجامعة على امتلاك ناصيات نجاح في العمل المهني تمت مقاربتها بشكل تقنوي تكنيك، كأننا بإضافة أمور في البرامج أو المناهج الدراسية سنحل المشاكل. أعتقد أن الأمر أصعب بذلك بكثير، مسألة ثقافة داخل المؤسسات التعليمية. فحينما نأخذ مؤسسة ثانوية أو مؤسسة ابتدائية وتكون بعض المواد كالرياضيات مثلا مواد نبيلة ومواد أخرى مواد مهنية، يعني أنه من درجة ثانية، إذا لم نستطع تغيير هذه الثقافة في المستويات ما قبل الجامعية يصعب أن نخلق جيل من الشباب قادر على الاندماج بيسر في عالم الشغل.
السيد محق في ذلك. أنا أرى أن مسألة العمل أولا هي مسألة